course, let's come back to that wonderful word, adherence. We want people to adhere to the nutritional changes that they make and the exercise habits that they make, because the number one most important thing for anyone that's trying to embark on this journey is to understand that maintaining their body weight is actually the goal. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Smart Strength Training podcast. So this is podcast number 16, and we're talking about diets, specifically that diets fail, and why do diets fail? Now, I'm sure if you were enticed into this podcast title, then you've tried a diet or two over the years, and probably with varying degrees of success. The most common is they work at first and they stop working and you lose motivation and you just give up, or you lose the weight and you look great, you feel great, but you can't sustain that weight loss and you put it all back on and maybe even more. And there's a real sort of like anti-diet culture, the body positivity movement, often fasting advocates, intermittent fasting advocates, low carb fanatics, anyone promoting the blood glucose monitors. They gleefully will tell you that diets don't work, and they'll try and convince you that it's because you need to believe in basically whatever ideology or product or diet they are trying to push. But rather than just saying that diets don't work, let's talk about why they don't work. Why do people struggle to lose weight? And why do people give up? And most importantly, why after all of that hard work do people often gain that weight back, and maybe even more so? Because if you understand the reasons why diet work, then it will hopefully give you a better chance of arming yourself to be able to avoid being one of the kind of unfortunate statistics that we have in this arena. And let's just highlight those statistics. So of the people that start a diet overweight and they are aiming to lose weight, only 20% of those people manage to achieve half of the weight they initially intended to lose. So only 20% actually achieve the goal, or half the goal they were aiming for. And then of that 20% that do lose the weight, only 10% are able to keep it off for 5 or more years, which is a fairly alarming statistic. But that doesn't mean that diets don't work. It simply means that traditionally, the methods we've been using just miss the mark, and we're missing what's important for long-term success. So I want to go through what I consider to be the 4 biggest, actually it's not what I consider, it is what is often stated to be the 4 biggest issues we have with adherence, based on research, based on years of anecdote and just understanding of why people struggle so much. So the first one is pretty obvious, I imagine. It's adherence. People are great at first. No one has a problem losing weight for the first maybe 4 weeks or so. And it's interesting to look at the weight loss literature to notice how many people they enroll at the start of the weight loss intervention, and then at what point they have drop-offs. And I would say this aligns beautifully, speak to any personal trainer, anecdotally, it lines up beautifully. After about 4 weeks, you start to see drop-offs, and then the average dieter lasts no more than 8 weeks. So we know that adherence is a major issue. Why is adherence a major issue? And that leads into the second point. But don't worry, we are coming back to adherence. I've got more to say on adherence. Sustainability. So sustainability is probably the most problematic issue we have with dieting, because most diets revolve around a restriction. You've got the ketogenic diet, you've got the paleo diet, the carnivore diet, the low carb, Whole30, Weight Watchers, even vegan diets, and maybe with the exception of something like the Mediterranean diet. And when we restrict whole foods, or in a lot of these cases, like whole macronutrients for the keto, carnivore, and Whole30 and paleo, you are very likely to become consumed with the thought of these foods. And of course, when I say whole macronutrient, I'm basically often talking about carbohydrates. And for a lot of people, I would say most people, their favorite foods are going to be based around carbohydrates. So initially, when you start anything, you start a new business, you start saving money, you start a diet, you start a workout program, motivation is high and people can stick to it at first. Also, what plays into that is usually weight loss is pretty rapid in the first place. So you've got this loads of motivation, you're seeing the scale move. But if your focus is only on weight loss, what happens when your weight loss plateaus? And when I say when, I mean when. It's going to happen. And if the only thing you ever think about when entering into a diet is weight loss, you are guaranteed to be setting yourself up for failure, because weight loss will slow down and it will probably go backwards at some point, and that is normal. And you better be prepared for it, and you better have things to focus on around it. And by centering your entire nutrition around restriction, even if it's done with good intentions and with good like health outcomes, like I understand abstinence from alcohol makes sense. I understand that reducing or eliminating refined sugar potentially could have net health improvements, but you're also setting yourself up for failure, or your chances of failure are certainly stacked slightly higher. But of course, the challenge with the word moderation, eat everything but in moderation, that poses a problem, because if you have wine in the house or you have chocolate in the house, are you then the sort of person to then overconsume those foods when you're tired, when you're sad, when you're frustrated, when you're angry? But by telling yourself you're not allowed these foods, you are then running that risk of the urge of overconsumption, and binging on them is far greater. So is it not a better option to allow yourself a glass of wine when you're out for dinner once a week, or a pastry from your favorite bakery once a week or once a fortnight? And then that sustainability element also comes into the way that people work out. Going from zero, so sedentary, just walking back and forward, to 4 or 5 times per week, you're doing cardio, running, spin classes, you're getting your 10,000 steps in per day. If your baseline activity was zero and you jump all in, there is a huge, huge change in the energy expenditure that you're having per day, per week, and the time that you're allocating to exercise and not to tasks that you love. And I find the research into this, certainly emerging research into this, is super, super fascinating. Research shows that when we take someone, let's talk about someone that's very active, someone that's highly active, and they get injured, and all of a sudden they are doing less and less movement. By adjusting their exercise activity down, their mood and desire to train ramps up through the roof. And then the opposite is true. If we take people that are highly inactive and sedentary, and you move their exercise activity up, they have a net desire to reduce that activity. And it's simply because if you move the needle too far, it's too big a change in what you're used to. And then what people perceive as like quote unquote low motivation is simply an unsustainable level activity based on your norm. And then, not also to mention that exercise actually doesn't play a huge role in weight loss for a lot of people. So starting with 1 or 2 sessions per week, moderate activity, maybe a 5 to 15 minute walk every day or so, that's just nudged you along 10 to 15%. And that's all that you need, because of course, let's come back to that wonderful word, adherence. We want people to adhere to the nutritional changes that they make and the exercise habits that they make, because the number one most important thing for anyone that's trying to embark on this journey is to understand that maintaining their body weight is actually the goal. And I've touched on this in the podcast, I think twice before already. It's not just about losing that weight. It has to be about sustaining that weight. So then people have to make peace with the fact that the only way to stay weight stable at the end of their weight loss journey is to make these elements of nutrition and training overall lifestyle habits that you stick to ongoing. And if you think that you can't stick to a diet for 8 weeks, then how on earth do you expect to stick to it for the rest of your life? Now, I'm not saying I want people to be dieting and therefore lowering their calories all the time, but you do need to center your nutrition and your habits around things that will keep you weight stable. So you need to be the sort of person that prioritizes whole food, that thinks about adding protein to their dishes, that gets plenty of fruit and veg in, and who stays hydrated. You cannot go back to old habits, especially let's say you were 10 kilos heavier before and you were on a path where your weight was just going up and up and up. You were obviously eating too many calories. That diet of the types of foods you were consuming, you can't go back to. You have to come to a new version of that. And then also recognizing, as I said before, that a lighter framed human being, so you've lost the 10 kilos, does require less energy at rest to sustain that body weight. That's hopefully quite logical. If you were to fill your car up with all your worldly belongings and drive across the country, you would be using more fuel per mile than if that car was then emptied. So we recognize, I don't always like using cars as an analogy, but it works quite well in that context. So recognizing that a lot of the changes that you make do need to stick if you're going to stay weight stable at the end. With a note on this one, that I've worked with a lot of clients that ate quote unquote healthy when I started working with them. They were getting lots of veggies in, they were getting protein in, lots of home cooked meals, they were managing their overall sugar intake, and generally speaking, their nutrition was really good, but they were still gaining weight. Now, I think this is why it's really important, and I go back to that podcast I did earlier in the year around, do calories matter? It's possible to eat a healthy diet but still eat too much total energy. It's possible to consume meals and foods that are healthy on paper. Peanut butter is healthy, but it is energy dense and it is easy to overconsume. Free pouring olive oil into your salad is super, super healthy, but same thing. It's energy dense and it's easy to overconsume. And then the classic is like breakfast. You've got your avocado, buttered toast, a couple of poached eggs, and a little bit of smoked salmon. Super, super healthy, but you could probably hit close to your total daily energy requirements off that one dish alone by having so many layered high fat sources on a plate. I'm not saying you go low fat, but you do need to be aware of the energy density of these foods. So understanding what makes up the foods you're consuming does matter. It's not always going to be just about the health element of what you're doing. And then sticking with this idea of like the clients I've worked with in the past that do eat healthy brings us beautifully into my final point. People can eat very, very healthy Monday to Friday. And then when it comes to events and socializing, it all goes a little bit wrong. And it's really common to work with people in this scenario where during a week, they minimize ultra processed foods, their energy is pretty much on point, they get their protein in, they're thinking about that energy composition. And then when it comes to the weekend, they're eating out maybe 1 to 3 times per week. Now, I know people have some fairly strong opinions around calories on menus, but one thing I will state is that I guarantee you there probably isn't a single person that didn't look at a menu and go, oh my God, there's 2,000 calories in the risotto or some other dish on the menu. Like restaurant food can be wildly energy dense. And I have a few friends that work in restaurants and have been told that sometimes they have to downplay these numbers a little bit. So it is very, very naive to think that you can just quote unquote diet for 5 days and that's going to give you everything you need and it will cover you for eating out 3 times in that particular week. You still need to make smart choices. And then just going back to this menu, restaurant menu idea, as you're glancing through that menu, you would have seen, of course, a lower energy option. And it might not be a dish that you like. So you could actually just do a simple swap. Let's say you fancy the burger, but you can see the burger is 1,500 calories. Well, just logically thinking, burger comes with fries, and it's probably going to come with a lot of dressing of some sort. So if I just swap the fries for a salad and I ask for dressing on the side, okay, I can't tell you exactly how many calories that's going to be, but I've certainly managed the most energy dense element of that plate. So by placing some focus on what you're eating when you're eating out is a really smart thing to do. And that's not even just because you're trying to lose body fat. I think that's a smart thing to do, full stop. Learning how to manage restaurant food is something, or let's say events, socializing, and that also includes restaurant food, is a really smart skill to learn because that sets you up to be able to negotiate these situations and still be successful with staying weight stable and still be successful with weight loss if you are happening to be in a weight loss phase at that moment in time. So you do need to become the sort of person that thinks about it. And one of the things I always coach my clients when they are faced with multiple occasions that kind of crop up over a month or a week period or so is pick and choose your social activities. Let's say you're going out with your partner and it's their boss's birthday. Okay, so you've met the partner before, but they're not really your friends. You know you're going to be on the edge of the conversations anyway. I'm going to drive to that. Drive to it. I'm not going to drink. I'm going to have the fish. I'm probably not going to have a dessert. I'm going to have a protein-rich starter because you know what? As much as they're nice people and I want to be there to support my partner, that's not my tribe. That's not really what brings me the most joy in the world. But let's say in 2 weeks' time, you're out with your mum or you're out with all your mates. That's where you want full food freedom. You want to enjoy that meal, a few glasses of champagne, and just not even think about it. That's a great way to set an intention around the way that you're going to act and behave when it comes to eating out, recognizing that eating out becomes such a huge issue when it comes to sticking to sort of nutritional adherence, which is why it's a point into itself. And a final point, that if you, like, sometimes people say that you should, if you've got a weekend where you're eating out lots, create a calorie buffer in the week so you bring your energy intake down during the week. That's great to a degree, but if you restrict too hard outside of being in a restaurant and you walk into that restaurant both like hungry, angry, and the first thing you're confronted by is the bread, then the effort mindset will kick in and you'll eat everything in plain sight. So we want to be sensible. And again, going back to this idea that sustainability has to be an element of this. Like, we want to make sure we can stick to it and adhere to it overall. We have to make it a lifestyle that we're going to stick to forever. And we need to have strategies around how to manage events and social activities. Recognizing, by the way, I've spoken about this, that all these things are interwoven into one another, recognizing where the challenges are. Now, not all of what I've said will be relevant to every individual, but some elements of it I'm sure are. So you can cherry pick the bits that sound like they work for you and put those into practice in your life and in your own weight loss journey. So I hope you found some of the pointers from today's episode useful. This is very much things I coach all my clients when I'm working with them through nutrition. So if you want help with your own training and nutrition, then get in touch with me for online one-on-one bespoke personal training.